Okay. Okay, bon matin tout le monde. Good morning, everybody. J'espère que vous avez...
I hope that you've had a good week to date. We are here once again to continue our conversation on electric vehicles.
Study on electric vehicles. So, we've got two witnesses with us here in person in the first round, and then we'll have two witnesses with us in the second. Just a friendly reminder to witnesses, if you are using your earpiece and it's plugged in but not on your ear, please just make sure it's placed on the sticker in front of you in order to ensure that we are protecting the health and well-being of our interpreters. Mr. Baines is joining us online today. I can confirm that all of the tests have been completed. So with that, appearing today as an individual, a visiting lecturer from the Department of Economics at McGill University, Julian Karagesian, and a senior fellow from the University of Ottawa. Joining us today is Margaret McCuaig-Johnston. Witnesses, thank you for availing yourselves to the committee this morning. You'll have upwards of 5 minutes each for an introductory remark, followed by which we will have questions from the various political parties represented around the table here today. With that, Madame McCuaig-Johnston, I'll turn the floor over to you to begin. You'll have upwards of 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been a supporter of EVs for many years. At Industry Canada in 1995, I and my team introduced technology roadmaps to Canada jointly with industry leaders, and one of the first was in automotive technologies. In 2008, as ADM of Energy Technologies at NRCan, I initiated the technology roadmap for electric vehicles. I wanted Canadian companies and researchers to have a major role in the sector. This will be significantly aided by Canada's automotive strategy and Ontario government initiatives. However, I have a major concern about the introduction of Chinese EVs into the sector. First, our auto sector is under major stress with the imposition of U.S. tariffs in the heavily integrated North American market. This is not a good time for cheap imports to compete with cars our own workers make. In Brazil and Hungary, Chinese cars assembled from kits, never from local suppliers, are made in heavily roboticized factories, so they aren't the same number of jobs that our own factories have. Second, dozens of parts in each Chinese EV are made with aluminum from Uyghur forced labor. A 2024 report from Human Rights Watch says this includes Chinese brands, but also Western vehicles, including Teslas, Toyotas, Volkswagen, and GM cars made in China. Bauxite is shipped thousands of miles to Xinjiang to be processed into aluminum by free-cost Uyghur forced labor, and then shipped from there to car and parts companies. It's illegal to import products into Canada made in whole or in part with forced labor. But the staff positions at ESDC and GAC related to forced labor are being wound up in the cuts, except for a comms function. And it is not a priority in GAC's departmental plan for 2026-27. Also, a key customs notice on forced labor has disappeared from the government website, and the new notice regarding Chinese EV firms lists what companies must comply with, but makes no mention of forced labor. Also, new legislation and an agency promised just last year seem to no longer be proceeding. Does this government no longer care about forced labor? The U.S. Trade Representative recently launched a Section 301 investigation of Canada's implementation of forced labor policies under CUSMA, with up to 25% tariffs resulting across the board if those efforts are inadequate. This is not the time to be dropping the ball on forced labor. Third, there is a risk of the Baidu software in Chinese EVs, including Western vehicles made there. It sends data from the cameras, microphones, and GPS back to China. Their national intelligence law requires companies to spy if requested. Cars with this software are regularly updated remotely from China. A U.S. Department of Energy report released last year on the integration of EVs with the electricity grid says that a synchronized surge via charging vehicles could cause brownouts and market disruptions. This Baidu software should be stripped out when the cars arrive and replaced by BlackBerry's QNX used in North American cars. If not, Beijing will have very detailed data on all the streets and buildings in Canada, as well as passengers' personal information. Of course, all military CSIS, CSEC, or CMP, and even departmental locations should not permit Chinese vehicles. Fourth, in Europe, they saw that Chinese vehicles were being priced 10 to 15% below local competition, just enough to make the sale. So this year, they are requiring Chinese companies to negotiate comparable prices. But here in Canada, we're going in the other direction, requiring 50% of the vehicles to be below $35,000. The government has said it wants Chinese auto joint ventures here. Already, BYD has said they won't do that. They want to assemble independently. If we did have joint ventures, they should be more than 60% Western-owned with Canadian management, workers, and suppliers, especially in aluminum and steel, QNX software, and technology transfer to the Western firm. And we have to be prepared to walk away from the table if they do not agree. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. McCuaig-Johnston. Mr. Karagesian, the floor is yours for upwards of 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. It's an honor to come and give testimony before this committee of Canada's House of Commons. It's a first for me. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. I'm not representing any institution, public or private or otherwise. I'm a former special advisor at the Canadian Ministry of Finance, and I currently teach economics at McGill University. I worked at finance for over 25 years. I frequently provide commentary to Canadian and global media on economic issues. My interest today, I am affiliated with no party. I have no official ideology. My interest today coming here and speaking to you and accepting the invitation, the interest is with respect to Canada's long-term prosperity, the livelihood of everyday Canadians and of our children who are going to inherit this fine country of ours. My comments are limited to the international aspects of the government's EV and other related policies, including the recent tariff agreement with China. I'll start with the big picture. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that Canada is facing the biggest challenge to its economic model since the 1930s. The model that we have is based on deep globalization, on international trade, particularly much of it with the United States, and this model is under attack from the Trump administration. The intentional weaponization of our integration with the United States has exposed what was once a good thing and now has become a far-reaching dependency. The auto and steel tariffs are the point of the spear of this weaponization of integration and trade. This comes at a time of converging crises in Canada and in some ways globally. We face severe housing and healthcare shortages, a cost of living crisis. There's geopolitical conflict in the world. There's climate change and more. So we have our hands full. You have your hands full. The Government of Canada and its machinery of policy making has its hands full. This attack on our economic model should be seen in the longer, broader context of a U.S. border that has been thickening since the aftermath of 9/11, the 9/11 attacks since 2001. This and the U.S. withdrawal from the global system is a longer-term trend. And so has been the decline of Canada's automobile sector. At the turn of the century, we produced 3 million vehicles a year. 25 years later, we produce 1.2 million vehicles a year. And we went from being the 7th largest automobile producer in the world. We're not even in the top 10 now. Last year, again, we produced only 1.2 million vehicles. Over this same time, much of this lost production has gone to Mexico. Nothing against Mexico. That's where the production migrated. And they've emerged as the world's 5th largest automobile producer. Much of the loss of our production has come from the big three, who now collectively produce only 300,000 vehicles in Canada. President Trump, with tariffs and other measures, aims to get the rest of this back to the United States. Steel and automobiles back to the swing states, which are crucial for a permanent majority for MAGA. That's what they want, and they're open about it. Ontario and other parts of the country have felt the loss of this production in profound ways. The Czech Republic, Czechia, with 11 million people, produces more vehicles than Canada. With electric vehicles, Canada has an opportunity to start over, to plug into global supply chains, not just North American ones, to be a global player, not just a regional one. Canada possesses, we have many of the key fundamentals to be part of global supply chains in a fundamental way: critical minerals, mass electricity production, and more. And we have an emerging EV battery industry. The federal government's new automobile strategy and the opening of our economy to Chinese EVs is a step in the right direction. The new tariff deal and the new strategic partnership agreed with China paves the way to diversifying our trade and investment, not just with the second largest economy in the world, and in purchasing power parity terms, the largest economy in the world, but with the entire global south, where 75% of the world's population lives and over 55% of the global economy resides. Our future prosperity depends on trading with the entire planet, diversifying. Some critics have made a big deal of the 49,000 Chinese EVs coming to Canada. Why? This is 1.5 days production in China and less than 3% of our market. And they're a manufacturing superpower, and we're a natural resource and energy superpower. Surely we have a natural trading relationship. We could do much more both ways. We need to have a quid pro quo, and to build our export markets out and reduce our dependency, we have to trade with the entire planet, and there will be asks from the rest of the world. I believe this is in our vital national interest. Why are we hesitant to do this as a nation? It's understandable. A big part of the reason is fear. We fear a reaction from certain powerful interests south of the border. The Trump administration and previous administrations since about 2016 have created an anti-China narrative and a related fear, in some cases almost hysterical, of China. It's not a facts-based narrative, mostly. It's not a Canadian narrative. It was not made here. The point of this narrative, in my opinion, is to maintain leverage over Canada by preventing us from trading and flexing our wings and trading with the rest of the world. And reducing our excessive...
Mr. Karagesian, I'm going to have to cut you off as we're a little bit over the allocated amount of time, but there'll be opportunities throughout the discourse to follow here. Okay, well, I always like when we have diverging viewpoints. It makes for a good conversation. So with that, Mr. Guglielmin, the floor will be yours for 6 minutes to start us off.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both the witnesses for your testimony. Ms. McCuaig-Johnston, you appeared before the International Trade Committee on March 12th and testified that Chinese EVs carry surveillance software, cameras, microphones, GPS tracking, and more alarmingly, Chinese companies are legally required to cooperate with the Chinese government's intelligence services. Now, given all that, does the Liberal government's deal to import Chinese-made vehicles at nearly zero tariffs pose a national security threat to Canada?
I would say there are significant risks. We would need, before they arrive, to set up guardrails. And one of the guardrails would be that the Baidu software be stripped out. I understand some Chinese EVs have QNX, which we'd have to verify that the data is not stored in China. But we should not have any Canadian data stored in China, and that means stripping out the Baidu software when the vehicles arrive. There are other measures if we're going to have manufacturing of Chinese EVs here. And I would mention that while the Chinese EVs would be 3% of the total number of cars sold in Canada, they're more than half, 70,000, which they'll get to 70,000, I'm sure, in the second year, is more than half of all EVs sold in Canada last year. So it's a big number when you look at it in the market of EVs.
For the record, just for your knowledge, are there any provisions in the current agreement that would prohibit this surveillance technology from being installed in the Chinese vehicles when they're imported here into Canada?
We haven't seen the detail of the agreement. This is something that the Canadian officials would have to inform the Chinese officials that we were going to do this. There's nothing, as far as I'm aware, that would prevent it from being done.
So would you say that before signing this deal, the Canadian government would have been well aware of the potential security risks with this software?
Indeed, if it's the deal was negotiated in a cone of silence, the Canadian manufacturers were not involved at all. And indeed, they were reassured that EVs were not on the table, and that if they were put on the table, there'd be a conversation with them. That didn't happen. So the negotiators did not get the benefit of the manufacturer's knowledge. I don't know if they got the benefit of CSIS and CSEC, but CSIS and CSEC is very well aware of the risks of Baidu technology.
So about a year ago, in March 2025, the former industry minister, now finance minister, Francois Champagne, in a response to a question on whether or not the Liberals would get rid of the 100% tariff, said, and I quote, "We're going to stand strong. We want to protect our industry. We want to protect our workers. We want to protect our communities." He also affirmed that China doesn't respect the rules. Quote, "They're dumping products here and cheap products, and therefore that would be hurting our Canadian economy and industry," end quote. So my question is, if that was true in 2025, has anything changed since then to 2026 where that wouldn't be true? And what does the policy reversal say to automakers and parts manufacturers that are already investing in Canada?
Nothing has changed from that time, and I would say that around the cabinet table, Minister Champagne is probably the most knowledgeable about the risks of China. He dealt with the Michaels, he dealt with research security challenges and put in place Canada's current research security system, which is a model for the world. It's the best in the world. And he's dealt with Chinese investment problems. He's dealt with all kinds of risks. So he is very knowledgeable about this. And, you know, I think our own manufacturers are at serious risk here.
You mentioned in your opening testimony about forced labor for EVs and other things manufactured in China. Specifically, you mentioned the Uyghurs, but also on top of that, we have the surveillance issue, no binding investment conditions. Now, the government calls this an affordability measure. So do you think that vehicles built with forced labor that transmit Canadian data and undercut our auto sector could ever be considered like good affordability tools for the Canadian public?
I would not trade off the torture and armed surveillance of Uyghurs in Xinjiang for a marginal added number of cheap cars in Canada. That's not an equal trade-off by any means. And I was surprised that the government did it. I was very disappointed. And I think it's therefore up to the government now to reassure Canadians that there will be no EVs entering Canada from China unless they are entirely free of components produced by forced labor. The customs notice for Chinese EVs does not mention forced labor at all. It mentions things like a plant legislation and motor vehicle safety rules and so on that the cars must comply with, but it doesn't say anything about forced labor. It should. That should be one of the measures that Canada takes, and we can't just take their word for it. There has to be a commitment that there will be transparency in the supply chain, because the forced labor comes from the aluminum in dozens of parts of each EV. And so we have to have assurance, and the Chinese vehicle manufacturers need to display for Canadian officials the exact supply chain, where their aluminum comes from, what happens with the bauxite as it's on its way from aluminum, where is the bauxite from, before we can be reassured.
Ms. McCuaig-Johnston, I'm going to have to end there. Mr. Guglielmin's now 45 seconds over allotted time, but there'll be an opportunity to provide more after that. Mr. Ma, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the witnesses being here. Due to the time limit, I'm going to be asking for very sharp, precise answers for the following questions for Ms. McCuaig-Johnston. Do you have an advanced degree in technology and cybersecurity? Yes or no?
No, but I have spent
like
37 years in that
I need to get short answers,
business.
please.
Okay.
The other one is you belong to the China Strategic Risk Institute. So does this institute specifically look for risk when there isn't one? Yes or no?
No,
So why is it a risk institute?
because it analyzes risks that are obviously there.
Thank you. So the last question then is, you claim about forced labor in Shenzhen. Have you witnessed this yourself? Have you been there ever?
I've been to
Sorry.
China many times.
Have you witnessed
since
forced labor in Shenzhen?
1979?
Have
No.
you witnessed forced, just a short answer. Have you witnessed forced labor in Shenzhen? Yes or no? So did you get that
I
from
work closely with
hearsay?
Human Rights Watch, where researchers
Okay.
did witness it.
So thank you. Following question is for Professor Kerry Goodsian. Many of those opposed to our government's EV deal with China have expressed various talking points centered around idea that somehow China is using the deal as an opportunity to create, quote, create a foothold in the Canadian auto market and then blow our sector away, unquote. So this idea is especially important to consider in the context of the ongoing affordability crisis and our domestic auto industry, which employs thousands of Canadians, workers, including in my own riding of Markham Unionville. So, Professor, what are your thoughts on this matter, and how would you respond to these talking points?
Sasanya, thank you. In terms of China using Canada as a foothold, my approach to any question is particularly political and geopolitical ones is to pretend that I'm an alien coming to Earth and I'm looking at every side. From China's point of view, this is a day and a half production. It's a day and a half's worth of production. That's number one. Number two, we don't make many EVs in Canada. We hope to. So we do have a cost of living crisis. Automobiles are extremely expensive. You can buy a Tesla and perhaps help pay. I'm not sure about the details of how Tesla's corporate plan works, but perhaps help pay for his $868 billion salary for Mr. Musk. Or you could buy extremely efficient or have at least the potential to buy very well-made electric vehicles from the rest of the world, including China, that makes 70% of the world's electric vehicles and accounts for 65% of the world's demand. I will say this. Sorry, I'll wait for the next question. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. So many of those opposed our government's EV deal, as we said, and concern about personal data and so forth. Now, although today in our smart home devices, they have far more data than we would like to have, and in our cell phones and so forth, having our fingerprints as well as facial profiles. I mean, that is more dangerous than knowing where you've been with your car. So what is your response to these arguments, and do you believe that this will be a legitimate concern?
I don't. I think at the point you mentioned about smart devices, whoever has an iPhone in this room, we'll have to corroborate this, but I think 85% have been assembled in China, iPhones and other smart devices. So if we're concerned about this, let's start with smartphones. If China wants to spy on us, as other big countries do, spy on everybody, then they could use their space station and all of the other technologies they have. I'm just wondering whether they're interested in my driving to my kid's hockey game and, stopping at Tim Hortons or wherever I stop. I just don't think that's a legitimate concern. What I do think is a legitimate concern is the sheer size of China. And they'd be the first ones to admit this. There are 1.425 million people. At purchasing power parity, they're the largest economy in the world. They have heft. And dealing in any asymmetric relationship like this, one has to be careful, whether it's the United States or India or China or even the EU, which has extensive protections on agriculture, which is one of our big comparative advantages in international trade. Thank you. As well. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Further, you have written about, quote, we have more to gain from this agreement than we have to lose, given that our, unquote, given that our relationship with our largest trading partner, as you said, has been upended, and we need to upend our relationship, not harken back to an era that's past. So what does the future of Canada's automotive industry look like with and without diversifying our trade?
Without diversifying?
With and without diversifying. Yeah.
Without diversifying our trade, our industry has been, for the past 25 years, in long-term decline, in terminal decline. As I mentioned in my statement, we're down over 50% in production, which has been particularly brutal for Ontario and Quebec and parts of Quebec. So our industry, without any kind of diversification with China, with India and other countries, has taken a beating. It's 60% decline in vehicle production. With diversification, Canada possesses, we're a natural resource superpower, and we can play to our advantage. We have critical minerals. We have inexpensive electricity production. The government of Mark Carney, Prime Minister Mark Carney, is expanding this electrification. So we have critical minerals, electrification, and we have a battery industry. We could plug into the global industry. Mr. Trump, Treasury Secretary Bessent, and all of his other senior officials in that administration have made clear to us that American automobiles will not be staying in Canada. Japanese automakers have been very loyal to this country.
Mr. Carrigan, I'm sorry to interrupt, but to be fair, we're now 45 seconds over the allotted time for Mr. Ma. So, Monsieur Saint-Marie, la parole à vous pour 6 minutes. Merci.
Mrs. Saint-Marie, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning to both witnesses. I'm very impressed by the amount of information you've presented us with. I think this is a very interesting panel. I have a number of questions for the two of you, and then I have a second shorter round later. But I'd like to start with Ms. McCuaig-Johnston. The whole issue of forced labor in China by the Uyghurs is of great concern. As an economy, we can't encourage this type of practice. And to say that we're going to have cheaper products like EVs is never an argument that can be used to justify this type of practice. My colleague Simon Saint-Pierre Tremblay, who is a spokesperson on this for our party, tabled a bill based on what's happening in the U.S. So once we've identified that in a region that there is forced labor, the burden of proof is on the importers to say, well, the merchandise, whether it's vehicles or vehicle parts or other products, were not made from forced labor. So would this type of policy or law, should it be adopted by Parliament? Thank you.
I believe that law should be adopted. Last year, the government actually had two pieces of legislation in development. One was concerning the ban, and the other was concerning how you track any human rights infringements in the supply chain. Both of those pieces of legislation should go ahead, particularly given that we are now at a point where we have to demonstrate our commitment to forced labor enforcement under the Section 301 investigation. It's not this is a huge risk for Canada to get 25% tariffs across the board. So yes, thank you for that. There's also an agency that was promised a year ago. That should go forward as well.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. The issue of grabbing information through Chinese vehicles is of great concern. Even if, as Mr. Carrigan said, we're already being watched by other devices such as phones, computers, and satellites in space. In my opinion, we should never open the door up to additional espionage, and it needs to be framed. You said that China and the government of China has legislation which forces Chinese companies to transfer data back, which is of great concern. But a specific concern for me, I'm not a specialist, but to my knowledge, the American government has a similar policy which can force American companies to transfer data back as well. And I think for the moment we're in a democracy in the U.S. However, this is still a concern. So is this a concern that you share? Thank you.
This is something that I think we need to look at carefully, and it's why that I recommend QNX, which is BlackBerry Canadian technology. I served 37 years in the Canadian government in science and technology policy programs and funding, interpreting between the scientists and engineers and the ministers and senior officials what the policies should be. I have an international relations degree in master's focused on China. I've studied China inside out since 1979 and helped them develop their R&D capacity as they were developing. But under Xi Jinping, we have a very different form of government. And at the same time, the U.S. Has been shown to have negative, if not malign, kidnapping citizens and so on, at least some negative components to its policies, and so we need to be cautious of that as well.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais maintenant me
Thank you very much. I'd now like to speak to Mr. Karagizian for a couple of questions. I find that your perspective of the economic crisis and the economy is helpful, and what can be done is also very interesting. In particular, the solutions. So with the EV sector is a space for the Canadian economy to develop. However, as you said, competition is ferocious, and world leaders, as you've said, in this space are definitely China. In the U.S. under Biden, there was some development taking place, but it seems that it was completely stopped by the Trump administration. And here, we want to compete with the American model directly, but the advantage, the comparative advantage that we have has to do with critical minerals and clean energy, which we have in abundance and at a cheap price. So I'd like to hear what you have to say about if that is where we should maximize production rather than in the final putting together of the cars. And perhaps you could speak to us about American or European companies for EVs. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll answer the questions, maybe not in order. Thank you for your questions. My approach, just as a human, as a person, as an economist, as someone who was a cadre at the Ministry of Finance, it was beaten into us there to think of Canadian prosperity, and that's what I think of. And so I think, from the point of view of workers in this country, skilled manufacturing workers or any other Canadian, what's important is to have the means to have an income, to live in dignity, whether it's actually assembling a car or being part of global supply chains, or manufacturing the cars for our high-speed rail and building a high-speed rail right across this country, like the regular rail that linked our country in the second half of the 1800s. Does it, I'll say this generally, but I have a very particular affection for manufacturing. But from the worker's point of view, from a family's point of view, if you're earning a good salary, does it really matter if it's in a car plant or in a train, manufacturing trains, or being part of global supply chains? We are unable to compete globally. We were able to compete with the North American Auto Pact between Canada and the United States, in which we had 20% of the North American market. That pact has been over since 2001. Having said that, my first interest is to protect our skilled workers in this country, and we have templates. We could go with industrial policy for our EV sector, and with limited importation of Chinese EVs, we could follow the Australian model, which is to shift their manufacturing workers into the defense industry, which has very high multiplier effects on economic growth. And we are going in this direction to meet our new NATO commitments, and we've already achieved the 2% of GDP. So we have lots of options. I think that government involvement is going to be critical in every option. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Saint-Marie. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Ms. McCuaig-Johnston, I want to apologize for the member on the other side of the table.
Point of order.
Very rude to you.
Okay, colleagues, just one moment. I sense we've got a little bit of tension brewing. I have a point of order that I'm going to address. And then, Ms. Borelli, I've paused the clock so you won't lose time on the matter. Madame O'Rourke on a point of order.
Thank you, Chair Carr. So we've had frequently the Vice Chair use a similar line and tone in questioning, and so there's nothing untoward in terms of my colleagues' interaction.
Okay, thank you, Madame O'Rourke. Not a point of order that that I see in there. Madame Borelli, you're of course free to use your time as Mr. Ma on a point of order.
Well, I obviously in public being accused, and I like an apology from the member from the other side.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ma. That would not be a point of order, and I don't.
Give me evidence that any violation that requires an apology for me on my behalf.
So, Mr. Ma, I think we're kind of getting into a little bit of debate at the moment. Ms. Borelli, I might ask, just for the sake of allowing us to get back to our line of questioning, that we focus, if possible, on the substantive content and nature of the discussion before us. So with that, I'm going to return the floor to you with 4 minutes and 52 seconds remaining of your 5 minutes.
Well, I'll continue with my apology for the behavior of the member across the aisle. You're giving very good testimony.
Point of order. I did not ask you to represent me to apologize, so thank you.
Okay. So, colleagues, I think it's obvious that there is some disagreement about the language being used. I think we can move past this. We've got two witnesses before us who are offering some insight into an important study that we asked for, and I would suggest that instead of focusing on the internal dynamics between members, we direct our questions to the witnesses before us in an attempt to gain some further insight into the matters before us. Ms. Borelli, I'll turn the floor back to you.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. McCuaig-Johnston, my job as a parliamentarian is to protect Canada, not to protect a foreign hostile country. So my questions are going to be in regards to the ramifications in Canada from this importation of Chinese electric vehicles. So when you combine the labor cost gaps, so 89 to 90% of the labor costs in China are paid off with subsidies. Combine that with state subsidies, the access to capital that the Chinese have. Is it accurate to say that this is not a traditional competition for Canada, but a state-backed industrial strategy that Canadian companies simply can't match?
Canadian companies could never match the labor costs of China, even if there weren't subsidies in China, which there are at many levels. And we see that in where they choose to manufacture. And when I say manufacture, I use that term loosely because what they do is they assemble. They bring the cars over to Brazil, Hungary, or Spain, where wages are low, and assemble in a very highly roboticized factory. And so there aren't the same numbers of highly paid unionized jobs that we see in Canada. BYD, when it went into Brazil, said that it was using Brazil as its wedge in South America, its entree into South America, and then said it's going to use Canada as its entry into North America. It was asked if it would do a joint venture, and they said no. A week and a half ago, they announced no, they will not do a joint venture in Canada. They want to do their own assembly here in Canada.
So really, the real issue is not about competitiveness, but whether or not Canada is just willing to allow its workforce to be displaced by a foreign one.
This is what we see in Europe, where the cars have been brought in, and they price 10 to 15% below the competition, just enough to make the sale, and they're displacing not just EVs in that market, but combustion engines and even used cars. So this is what will face Canada. It's suggested that 70,000 cars aren't very many. It's 70,000 a year, and we can be sure that within a year, the Chinese embassy is going to be pushing our officials to move that number higher.
So is it fair to say, without a change in policy direction, that Canada risks losing its domestic and manufacturing workforce over time?
I think that could happen. It depends on how many are allowed in the longer term and whether there are joint ventures. I think joint ventures might work with a lot of guardrails, such as technology transfer, QNX software, and the Western company owning more than 60% of the joint venture. But I've done a 6-year study in China of joint ventures and Canadian technology joint ventures, and every single one of them has had serious problems. And so I'm not optimistic about joint ventures. If we do them in Canada, I think there might be some, if they're well negotiated, there might be hope. But if they're joint ventures in China, I just wouldn't do any more because they've been so problematic up until now.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Borelli. Madame O'Rourke, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. McCuaig-Johnston, I have a couple questions, also just sort of a yes or no. First, I'm thrilled to hear that you're supportive of the Canadian government's automotive strategy and its investment in the EV supply chains. I'm just curious, having worked at industry, whether you also support the Strategic Response Fund and the Regional Tariff Relief Initiative and the Productivity Super Deduction, all of which support Canadian manufacturing. Just yes or no?
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful. The other piece that I was curious about is the Minister of Industry said that through the Canada Investment Act, we could require Canadian parts, technology, inputs, as well as labor constraints, and that we could also reduce any sort of risk to software. So is it your understanding that all of these concerns could be addressed through the Canada Investment Act?
I don't think they could all be done through the Canada Investment Act. That would be one tool to use.
Right.
One of the problems with technology transfer, and I know that Minister Joly has talked about that, is that in China, there's a law that you cannot, the government and the governmental authorities are not permitted to request that Chinese companies share their intellectual property with foreign firms ever. That would mean there could not be technology transfer to Canada or a Western company.
Okay, but we have some tools to meet some of the concerns that you've raised.
Yes.
That's perfect. The other piece is that the current 3% of autos, so the 49,000 that could be imported from China in the first year, that just sets us back to where we were in 2023, right? When the vehicles coming in from China were primarily Teslas and Polestars. So did you have the same concerns about those vehicles coming into Canada in 2023, and were they expressed at the time?
At that time, The answer is no. The reason is that Teslas at that time did not have Baidu technology, and they do now.
Okay.
And the other reason is that in 2024, the Human Rights Watch report was written. It wasn't
so
written
we'll
in
just use the tools.
2023.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
So we know more now than we
perfect.
did in 2023.
And we have some tools to address that. Perfect. Thank you. And Dr. Karagesian, just wanted to ask you as well. You're talking about Canada's long-term prosperity. I'm encouraged to hear you talk positively about Canada's EV strategy, from the critical mineral extraction to energy to the entire supply chain. So thrilled with that. I'm wondering if you wanted to talk about how the new tariff deal really paves the way to diversifying our trade and investment more broadly.
Okay. Do I start now?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think that the new tariff deal and the wider strategic partnership paves the way to diversifying our exports, our sources of investment, also our imports, because we have, as a nation, we have to put something on the table. China's trade with Canada represents 1% of their total trade. Our trade with China is less than 5% of ours. So we're not talking about big numbers from the get-go. In absolute dollar terms, our trade's $130 billion two-way. So to be able to build out this relationship, which has been narrowly circumscribed over 10 years of geopolitical tensions, 8 years, to build that out, we have to put things on the table. I think the deal that the Carney government got from the People's Republic of China was quite a good one. We're talking really about a small number of vehicles and opening up access to their markets for our food products again and our Western farmers and Eastern fisheries. We do have to put something on the table, but at the same time, if our concern is, and this is obviously my concern, and I think it's this committee's concern, and the government's and all people in Canada, we need manufacturing in this country. No country can be prosperous without manufacturing of some sort. And so we need to build our trades, and we need to build our industrial sector back up after 30, 40 years of deindustrialization. And so whether we're actually assembling autos, we can, but we will need government industrial strategy to do this, or whether we're making armored vehicles for the defense sector, or whether we're also building high-speed rail cars and street cars for our cities for clean public transportation. I think that people working in that industry will be happy if they have security and they have well-paid jobs. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
You
I
did. I just want to sneak in another really quick one. Earlier this week, the Conservative Party introduced an alternate auto plan or proposal in the House, and it suggested aligning with North American partners on Chinese tariffs. Just wondering, what would the impact of a flip-flop like that be, and just how damaging would a response like that be at this time?
I think a flip-flop like that would destroy credibility, any credibility we've built up over the past years. The Prime Minister zigzagged the world making trade deals. If we flip-flop like that, why would any partner out there in the world, particularly in the global south, trust us to have negotiations, number one? Number two, I just don't think going deeper in the North American platform path is the right way for Canada, because it increases our dependence on a country. And I say this, I'm very fond of the United States, I'm very fond of Americans, but it increases our dependence on a country that is not behaving like it used to behave. And it's been doing this for a long time. And so we don't know what comes after President Trump, but the long-term trend is not good for Canada. It's not good for our integration. And so we need to diversify. It's a question of resilience. It's a question of sovereignty. It's a question of actually national security. Because if you go into decline, what kind of national security do you have if you have a weakening economy? What kind of national security do we have when a president, a single person, and his officials can weaponize trade and force concessions out of us? What kind of national security do we have when a president can tell the United Kingdom, don't bring wind turbines in from China because they're going to spy on northern England where the sheep are? Don't let them build an embassy. What kind of national security are we going to have if we increase our dependence on a single nation? So that's, sorry to go off on a tangent like that, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Caragastian. Appreciate the closing of the remark there. Thank you, Madame O'Rourke. Monsieur Saint-Marie, 2 minutes 30 secondes.
Mr. Saint-Marie, you have 2 minutes 35. Thank you very much, Chair. For Mr. Caragastian, first of all, you said in a previous response that military strategic defense programs had a multiplying effect, a high one. Could you add additional information in writing to the committee, to the clerk, with regards to that? Because this is something that we're studying, in fact. And I think I read in The Economist not that long ago that they were saying, be careful, it won't have that much impact for the entire manufacturing sector. So if you do have suggestions or things that you recommend we read on this topic, that would be great because it's of interest to us. Thank you. Another issue, I'm not sure if you saw this, this was published only at the beginning of this week, but it was in Foreign Policy magazine, a text by historian Niels Gilman, and it's called Electrostate versus Petrostate. And the thesis is that before there were the two capitalist and communist blocs, and he said, forget that. The new fight is between the electrostate, so led by China, with renewable energy, etc., versus oil states, which includes Donald Trump's USA, and also Russia and Gulf states. So I don't know if you've ever heard talk of this dichotomy, if you have any comments on it. And in his article, he refers to the speech by our Prime Minister regarding middle power countries and trying to find their space in this. And also he talks about unaligned countries and what type of infrastructure we need to choose that will help us sort out these camps, and does this align us with the camp and make it harder to switch sides later. So I'd like to know if you have any comments on this. Thank you. Thank you. We have 30 seconds left.
Okay. On the impact of defense and multiplier effects, if you look at the impact of the Second World War on the Canadian economy, we entered the Second World War not as a manufacturing nation, and we emerged from the Second World War. I'm not asking for war. We emerged from the Second World War as a manufacturing country. The multiplier effects are high. However, making weapons are investments in non-productive assets, but the immediate multiplier effects are high. With respect to your second point, I align myself with Prime Minister Mark Carney's bid to become part of a middle power group that does that protects the rules-based international order, and we need to find a coalition, so-called, of the willing to be able to do this, because Canada thrives when there are rules in this world. We're less than 1% of the world's population and less than 2% of the world economy, and we need rules more than anything to be able to deal in this world. And other countries in the global south are also asking for this, and in Europe, Australia, Oceania, the United Kingdom. So there are a lot of potential allies out there for this. Yeah.
Okay. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Saint-Marie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saint-Marie.
A bit of time earlier during the proceeding, so I'm just going to reduce this final round to 3 minutes from 5. So, Mr. Guglielmin, you'll have 3. Mr. Bardizzi, you'll have 3. That will conclude. The floor is yours, Mr. Guglielmin.
Thank you, Chair. So, in January 2021, Canada announced new measures to help address the risk of being complicit in human rights abuses in Xi Jinping China, specifically mentioned the Uyghurs. Now, personally, I find it alarming and offensive that a Canadian member of Parliament will use his time not to protect Canadians, but to defend a foreign country that has been well documented by Human Rights Watch and even our own government for human rights abuses, and also to attack the credibility of one of the witnesses sitting here before us today. So, Ms. McCuaig-Johnston, I'll allow you some time to defend your credibility on this issue and maybe highlight why it's such a problem that if we allow vehicles to be imported into Canada that are being developed through the use of forced labor.
Thank you very much. As I said, I made my career in government in science and technology policy and programs and funding, helping China develop its R&D capacity. when I retired, I started working on publishing on China's S&T governance and startup companies and so on, and joint ventures. I became more and more concerned as I saw things like China's role in the Arctic, and I've briefed across government on that. And China's use of surveillance technologies in Xinjiang and now across the country. And so it's through the technology lens that I came to start to work on the Uyghur issue, and that's what got me sanctioned by China. They don't like me talking about the Uyghurs, and they send their people out to harass me in my vehicle. But at the same time, we will always trade with China. They want our resources, we want their manufactured goods. It's 3.6% of our trade. It's often said it's our second biggest trading partner, the largest being the U.S. At 76%. Our second biggest actually is the EU, with CETA at 8% of our trade. And so we do need to diversify. The Indo-Pacific strategy is excellent for diversifying the trade. I've been thrilled with the Prime Minister's diversification
I just want to get one
policy.
more in because I'm almost out of time
Okay.
here. So we've been hearing a lot of, even on the last meeting on this subject, that we should be more concerned, it seems, with the threat of the United States to our security than a country like China. Do you agree with that assessment?
No. And I would say that we're at real risk, at very serious risk with the Section 301 investigation, calling us out for our very weak enforcement of the Uyghur forced labor legislation. The U.S. legislation is very strong. The Bloc has made tremendous efforts to strengthen Canadian legislation, and others around this table have as well.
Okay,
and we should be
unfortunately,
doing that.
I'm going to have to stop your time there, Mr. Guglielmin. Mr. Bardisi, 3 minutes. That'll conclude round one.
Thank you. Thank you. First, I'll start. Ms. McCuaig-Johnston, you described QNX as a technology that's Canadian technology that is currently in some Chinese EVs. Would it be a positive or a worthwhile trade objective of Canada to encourage the adoption of more technologies like QNX in Chinese EVs?
I would love to see that. We need to have Canadian technology wherever we can, and we need to ensure that the data is kept, if not in Canada, at least in North America, not in China, because they've demonstrated their malign intent towards us, much more so than I would say the United States has.
I know we've had in the past sort of more sectoral experts in the auto sector in front of this committee, and one of the things we've heard from them is that the earlier model that was founded in the 60-year-old Auto Pact around assembly and manufacturing has now lent itself to a broader array of technologies and skills and talents and deployments in a vehicle. And so when countries are doing trade negotiations, presumably the broad array of products in a sector like autos would then be discussed. Would you agree with that?
I would, but that's not the way the Chinese EVs operate. Their firms bring kits, and they're simply assembled. You wouldn't have the opportunity for Canadian aluminum and steel, for example, to be used. They would have to completely reconfigure their approach to autos in order for us to do that. If we're going to manufacture Chinese EVs here, we would have to try to do that, and we'd have to insist on Canadian parts in the vehicles, not
but some of the tools that some of the tools that Ms.
labor.
O'Rourke referred to and that I'm referring to here would be part of the policy trade toolkit. Okay, and actually we might hear from a witness later who has an interesting take on Chinese-Canada integration in this regard. To Professor Karagusian, you spoke about the Australian experience of the auto sector, but you also spoke about the Canadian. Your hunger for Canadian prosperity. In general, do middle powers like Canada benefit from a diversity of investment sources versus relying too much on a single investment source?
Absolutely. Thanks for your question. Diversity, I'll just speak about diversity in economics. Diversity is always a good thing. I mean, our dependence on the United States until 2 decades ago, 15 years ago, was a great thing but we all thought that was going to last forever. But the train kept moving. And we're on a train now, and the train's not neutral. It's going in a certain direction. And we have the opportunity right now, as a rich country, we have the richest inheritance in the world of natural resources, of energy, of water, and we have a great population, an educated population, and a kind population, and we can use this wealth now before we go into a kind of a decline, a downward spiral, to protect our prosperity, to build out our trading partners. And I just want to make a point, if I can, on
10 seconds here.
On national security. I share people's concern about foreign governments having our data. I'm also gravely concerned about groups of individuals that have our data, whether they're down south or anywhere else in the world. We also have to think about the dissemination of our data to private interests. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Bardisi. Okay, colleagues, we are going to suspend for about 5 minutes to transition into the second panel. Witnesses, thank you very much for being here today. Have a great rest of your day. Suspended. Okay. Okay, tout le monde, on va recommencer la...
All right, everybody, we're going to start our second hour.
Our second hour here. So we've got 2 new witnesses joining us here in person. We have from Beechman Motor Company Limited, Benjamin Robert Taylor, the Chief Executive Officer, and from the Canadian Association of Mold Makers, Nicole Vlanich, the Executive Director. Witnesses, you'll each have upwards of 5 minutes for opening remarks, following which we will have questions from the members that are before you here today. With that, Mr. Taylor, we'll start with you. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank the committee, recognize you for inviting me to be here today. It's very exciting. Also my first time engaging with the government, and to be doing it at the highest level. It's an excellent honor for us. To introduce myself, I'm the co-founder of Beechman. We are a Canadian startup that produces e-bikes and electric motorcycles right in the heart of Toronto. We've been doing so for 5 years now, although it's a project I've been working on for over 11 years. Mr. Bardisi has had the pleasure of meeting us and seeing our factory in person, and we encourage anyone who's interested to come and pay us a visit and see the bikes getting made. We are the first company of our kind, at least in a very long time. Last year, we became the first recipient of a federal motorcycle manufacturing license in over 80 years. The last company to receive one was Bombardier, who was the first company to ever receive one. So thank you very much. We're in a small group of 2. It was a long and arduous process to receive that. I think that there's lots we could talk about the barriers to new entrepreneurs in joining the EV market in Canada and ways we can reduce those barriers. But we're very proud to be there, and as of November, we've now sold over 1,000 electric motorcycles since our founding. So we have a long history of our company. We started as 2 men in a shed building electric bikes in a backyard. We now have an 8,000 square foot warehouse and headquarters where we produce bikes and ship them internationally, selling into the United States, into Costa Rica, and this year we're opening up sales in the European Union. We were featured this week in the front page of the Globe and Mail and the Financial Post with an excellent 5-page story in the Financial Post, which I encourage you to read for the full story of Beechman. But yeah, what I'd love to talk about today is the fact that, well, with EVs, I stand as an entrepreneur trying to enter this industry in Canada, assembling vehicles in Canada. I believe the world is in an inflection point. The transition to EVs will have casualties, and those casualties will be legacy industries. We're seeing this with the struggle of traditional gas companies to transition to EVs, as well as traditional strong automotive countries struggling to compete with China, as has been seen today. I believe that at any inflection point in history, The new niche and pure players are the ones that rise and thrive in the changing market, and I believe investment in that in Canada, in government, in operations like Beachman, will allow us to thrive and transition. Our business model at this time is pretty simple. We design all of our parts in Canada. We have them manufactured in China. We bring parts in, and we assemble the bikes here and then export them. We tried to make a motorcycle in Canada, and my partner Steve, he gave himself the leniency of 10 times the cost on a simple part like a frame, which is a piece of tube bent 8 times, welded in 12 places, and painted. We found that was impossible, and that the lowest price that we could get in Canada to produce a good like that, a simple piece of painted metal, was over 20 times what we could produce it in China for, including shipping and tariffs. I don't think that has to be the way. I think that there are ways to encourage a smaller scale and more affordable production in Canada, but it is the reality right now, and so I think that should be clear about our business model. I think overall in the EV market, we're facing a moment, as I mentioned, where a player is coming in with global power, with global expertise, and we will need to lean on our strengths. I believe that with Canada, as in any Western nation, our strengths lie in branding, quality, consumer trust. We've seen giants like Honda and Kawasaki in the 80s and 90s decimate the North American and other Western motorcycle industries. And the only players that survived were Harley-Davidson, Triumph, and Royal Enfield, who leaned on that same quality, trust, and strength of branding. I think similar things in the British car industry with players like Land Rover and Aston Martin, who survived when a lot of other Western companies failed, when the Japanese came in and took over. And I think we're in a similar moment. So I believe there's lots of conversations to be had about how we can encourage new brands that come up, pure EV players that encourage growth in Canada. I also want to point out as well that a project we're working on now at Beachman is to create an electric car, a small 4x4, produced in Ontario, Canadian-owned, Canadian-funded, Canadian-built, using our relationships with China to produce the basic components that we can't produce here at an affordable price in order to make a real, affordable, competitive consumer good. Built and sold domestically, and eventually scale that up to be able to export and represent Canada on the national stage, becoming Canada's first ever automaker. I think that transitioning Canada to a strong EV producer, as you had mentioned, Mr. Vice Chair, is becoming an electro state. I believe we're positioned in a very incredible way to become an electro state. I think now is the time to invest in it, and I believe that Canada will be stronger for it, both on the EV side, but also on things like increasing our power grid, increasing EV and clean energy generation, and increasing expertise in manufacturing the hardware and the massive industry that's going to be required for this transition to clean energy, not to mention the national security benefits, as we're seeing in countries like Cuba that have been completely cut off by the petrostates and are now suffering the consequences. I think that's a great representation of where I stand.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. Ms. Flanich, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Our CAM members play a critical and foundational role in Canada's manufacturing ecosystem. Mold making is where production begins. Before a part is made, before a vehicle is assembled, the tooling must first be designed and built. Without mold making, there is no manufacturing. Manufacturing contributes over 10% of Canada's GDP and supports approximately 1.7 million jobs. Mold making sits upstream of the entire system and is closely tied to where manufacturing takes place across Canada and North America. An estimated 70 to 80% of mold making supports automotive production. This makes our sector highly sensitive to EV policy and, more importantly, to where vehicles are built. The transition to electrification presents real opportunity. Canada has made important investments in EV production, battery supply chains, and advanced manufacturing. These are positive steps. However, to fully realize these investments, the supporting ecosystem must remain engaged. From our perspective, the key issue is where production occurs. Where a product is built determines whether Canadian industry participates in that work. When vehicles are built outside of North America, The associated tooling, engineering, and supply chain work is also located outside of North America. In those cases, Canadian manufacturers are excluded before production begins. Recent discussions regarding imported EVs highlight the importance of scale. The proposed volume represents a significant share, approximately 1/3 of projected EV sales in Canada in 2026. At that level, market access becomes market influence. It can shape sourcing decisions, investment timing, and supply chain participation, and has the potential to impact future CUSMA discussions and broader North American competitiveness. Our industry has already experienced the effects of recent shifts. EV programs expected to move forward have been delayed or canceled after companies have already invested in tooling and engineering time. This has created a spillover effect across the sector. More companies are now competing for fewer programs, placing pressure on pricing, margins, and long-term investment decisions. In an industry where margins are typically 5 to 10%, this creates significant strain. These impacts extend beyond automotive. When automotive demand slows, it affects overall capacity, capital planning, and workforce stability, limiting the ability of companies to invest and diversify. Our members operate in a global environment and maintain strong international relationships. At the same time, Canada's relationship with the United States remains critical. Canada's economy is deeply integrated with the U.S. CUSMA enables tariff-free trade across most goods when rules of origin are met and supports highly integrated production across North America. This is not about limiting trade. It is about aligning policy with domestic capability and ensuring Canadian industry remains part of the value chain. There are also environmental considerations. As EV adoption increases, so does the need to manage battery life cycles, including recycling, disposal, and environmental compliance. Canada does not yet have a fully comprehensive, harmonized end-of-life framework for EV batteries and vehicles. Current approaches rely heavily on industry-led programs that are not mandatory across all jurisdictions. When vehicles are imported, questions arise around how end-of-life responsibility is assigned, how environmental standards are enforced, and whether the burden ultimately falls on domestic systems, municipalities, and taxpayers. Our members are looking for clarity and transparency and how these responsibilities will be defined as the EV market grows. Looking ahead, there is an opportunity to ensure that Canada's EV strategy supports domestic production, workforce development, environmental responsibility, and long-term competitiveness. Our members are highly skilled, globally competitive, and committed to the future of manufacturing in Canada. Many are small and mid-sized, often family-owned businesses that provide high-quality, well-paying jobs. What they need is stability, predictability, and the ability to participate in the opportunities being created. A successful EV strategy is not measured only by vehicles on the road, but by whether Canadian industry has been part of making them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Vlanich. Okay, witnesses, thank you for your opening testimony. We're now going to get into our line of questioning. Mr. Falk, the floor will be yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Both your presentations were very interesting. You got a very interesting business, Mr. Taylor, and wish you all the best. Mrs. Vlanich, I'd like to begin my questions at least by asking you some questions, but first I'd like to couch it in something, and I want to quote a speech in the House of Commons from February the 1st, 2022, when debating the speech from the throne. Madam Speaker, there is virtually no doubt from any source whatsoever that there is slavery, that the Uyghur people are being enslaved, that products are being produced out of that part of China, and that the government of China directly or indirectly condones the production of those goods. You probably don't know who said that, but those comments were made by Liberal Member of Parliament, John McKay. He served the Canadian Parliament for 27 years. Today in this committee, we saw Liberal members of Parliament, Michael Maw, Dominic O'Rourke, discrediting a witness to defend the human rights abuses of China against the Uyghur people, and also...
Mr. Falk, I'm just going to have to address this point of order. I'll pause the clock. Madame O'Rourke?
I in no way discredited the witness that was before us.
No,
I did ask her to, I did ask her to
Maw.
keep her answers
Mr. Falk,
short.
1 second. Yeah.
But I in no way discredited the witness.
Okay.
And I pointed out simply that this line of questioning and that approach has been used in this committee frequently.
Okay. Thank you, Madame O'Rourke. Mr. Maw?
Yes, I object that my name is being now broadcast, in this fashion in being called. Like, you could call me as member of the other side, but you are naming people, and that is not the rules we have engagement here.
Okay, colleagues.
Well, then Mr. Falk,
Okay, colleagues,
I take exception to what
Mr.
you're
Ma,
saying.
I'm going to take the floor back now. Okay. I know where this is all going. So we have a decision point before us. We can all go back and look at the testimony from the previous hour to determine what we believe can be taken from that. We can use the time that we have remaining, which is about 30 minutes, to engage in a very interesting conversation about EV policy in this country from two experts, or we can use the time to litigate the previous hour that was before us. Members certainly have the prerogative to determine what it is they want to do. I just want to encourage us to bring the temperature down where possible, and I hope that we will be able to utilize the expertise of the two people before us to contribute to the report that we will ultimately be presenting to the House of Commons on this important subject matter. With that, Mr. Falk, I'm going to return the floor to you. I will just make one note, colleagues, which is that as we engage in points of order and other things that encourage discussion outside of the realm of soliciting answers from the experts here, it does take away from some of the time that we have allotted to us, and I just want all members to be aware. If I do have to reduce time, I'll do so judiciously. It will be from all sides around the table, but just a quick note to draw attention to that. Mr. Falk, I paused the clock at 4:48. You had 6 minutes, so that time is remaining for you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yep. It was just something I had never experienced here in Parliament before, that a Canadian politician would be defending China's human rights abuses. So let me carry on with my questions here. Ms. Vlanich, your association has publicly said the federal government's 49,000 Chinese EV agreement raises serious questions about industrial competitiveness and manufacturing employment. Were the mold makers and upstream suppliers properly consulted before this decision was made?
No, and that's something that I've been advocating for as the beginning of production, is to be consulted in these types of conversations.
In fact, the automobile industry was assured that the importing Chinese EVs into Canada was not on the table. The one other question that I want to ask before we move on is something that we haven't talked a lot about at this committee is, have you, as an industry or an association, discussed end of use for EV vehicles? And could you elaborate a little bit on that?
So that's something that is, on top of mind for our members, is the end of life for the vehicles, and noting that currently in Canada, the manufacturers, for the most part, take the responsibility for end of life, and what that would look like if we import those vehicles from China, and if those conversations have been had with them, that they have that financial responsibility and obligation to do what Canadian and North American manufacturers have agreed to do.
Yeah, dealing with electric batteries is going to be very different than dealing with the shredding of automobiles today and recycling that metal. Yes. And that's a consideration that you don't feel has been adequately addressed.
Exactly.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I'd like to turn my remaining time over to Mr. Guglielmin.
About 2 minutes 45 remaining.
Thank you, Chair. And just in light of what you said, I think I'm going to take this opportunity to move the following motion: that the committee unequivocally condemn forced labor practices in China. And I would like to remind this committee that it was first a Liberal government that first acknowledged the Uyghur forced labor camps and the human rights abuses. It's been widely recognized by the United Nations and other human rights groups. I'd also like to point out that it was in Beijing that detained two Michaels for over 1,000 days. It's because of, not the Chinese people, of course, but because of the government in China, that Huawei was banned here in Canada, that TikTok has been removed from government devices. These are serious threats and serious issues facing our country, and we as a party, or we as a collective here at this committee, need to come together and condemn this. I would also like to point out that there's a record of IP leakage and IP theft. There's a record of using their economy as geopolitical leverage. So I'd like to move this following motion because it's unclear here if Mr. Ma has deviated from the Liberal Party's longstanding opposition to Chinese enslavement and human rights abuses, or if he's soft-launching the Liberal Party's new position on these issues.
I have to respond to a point of order, so you'll maintain the floor after I deal with this.
A motion's been moved, but I'm not sure if we're moving directly into debate on the motion or what's happening exactly.
My read of the situation is Mr. Guglielmin is not concluded moving the motion, and that these are his remarks in relation to moving the motion. So once he's made it clear that the motion has been, I haven't seen or heard the motion. So Mr. Guglielmin, I imagine you're getting there. I might encourage you to move on with the preamble as soon as you can and get to the substance of the motion itself so that I can, along with committee members, first review it and determine its substance, and then we can decide where we go from here. The floor is yours, Mr. Guglielmin.
Well, I'll just go back to the conclusion of my little preamble, as you said. So it's just unclear if MP Ma's remarks are at odds with the Liberal Party's position and the government's position, or if he's soft-launching for the Prime Minister's new position on the Communist Party of China and their sort of permissive view on enslavement and the potential national security risk to our country. So I did state the motion up front, and I'll state it again, and that is that the committee unequivocally condemn forced labor practices in China. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So what I'm going to do here is suspend briefly so that there's an opportunity for us to have that circulated. Sometimes it's helpful for there to be a couple of minutes for members to think about how they want to address a motion that's being table dropped. So I'm going to suspend very briefly, make sure we get the proper wording, and we will come back momentarily.
We'll require translation of the motion as well.
Continue here. Mr. Guglielmin, you've presented your motion. I don't think you had anything further to add. I did have some hands up prior to. I had Ms. Kirkland, I had Monsieur Saint-Marie, and I now have Mr. Bardisi. Mr. Saint-Marie, you're pointing to Mr. Bardisi as if you want to give up your time, which you can do, but I do have Ms. Kirkland first. Ms. Kirkland, are you okay with us to go to Mr. Bardisi, or do you want the floor first? I'm not sure if there were.
First,
yes. Okay, the floor is yours.
We're just speaking to.
We are on debate on the motion. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just feel this motion is really important. So I've lived in China for a couple of years, and as a Canadian parliamentarian, I was appalled and disturbed when it seemed very much like a parliamentarian across the way was defending China when it's our job to defend this national security of our country, Canada. So the motion is very short and very clear that we unequivocally condemn certain practices, and I would expect that this committee would find it easy to do that and unanimously vote to condemn those practices. It's as simple as that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kirkland. Mr. Bardisi.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. On a des témoins devant nous.
Thank you, Chairman. We have witnesses before us who have expertise on specific topics that we're studying right now. Our side, for our caucus, we will vote for, and we would like to continue hearing from our witnesses.
We'll be supporting this motion so that we can move on to return to the witnesses and clear the record. If there was any doubt, I didn't see any doubt in the testimony of the Minister and the line of questioning from the first hour that would cause any doubt on this question. And we want to move on and also make sure that we focus on the things that are of concern to this committee.
Thank you for that, Mr. Bardisi. Mr. Ma.
Mr. Chair, since my name was being mentioned in this background of the motion, I'd like to set the record straight that the question with the witness was whether she had witnessed forced labor in Shenzhen that she had claimed. I had made no assertion of either support or deny it. I just asked whether she had witnessed it. And so that's the period. That was the line of question. We asked many times with different witnesses whether they have seen certain things that they claim. And that's very legitimate questions. And if the Conservatives want to turn that into a political situation, then, the shame is on your side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ma. Mr. Guglielmin, you do have the floor. I will just note, for the sake of what happens next, Mr. Bardisi seems to have indicated support from the Liberal side. I presume that the Conservatives are supportive of this, as they're the movers of the motion, and Mr. Sainte-Marie a indiqué l'appui de le côté du Bloc. Mr. Guglielmin, I will turn the floor over to you. I know there's probably an appetite for perhaps one or two more pieces of commentary, but we've quite clearly publicly established support for the motion, and I would encourage us to get to a vote quickly, given that we know the positions of the parties, as it will allow us to re-engage with our witnesses who are here today. Mr. Guglielmin, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I will just say it's glad to see that we're having unanimous consent to support this motion because, frankly, during the testimony, the line of questioning was to discredit the witnesses, basically the witness's authority. And the way that you went after her in that line of questioning was in defense of the fact that, hey, have you actually ever seen this? Meaning there is no slave labor in China. But I'm glad you and
colleagues, Mr. Ma, Mr. Ma.
We're glad to hear on this.
So, Mr. Guglielmin, I'm going to pause you too. Mr. Ma, the floor is currently mine. Okay. From my perspective here, colleagues, the record has been set straight. There are differences of opinion, as per usual, in this place, as to the meaning and construction of a way something was articulated. Let's just agree to disagree. Mr. Mao, I feel you've had the opportunity to set the record straight. Mr. Guglielmin, I feel you've made your point. I'm going to afford you the opportunity to continue making that point because the floor is yours, but I hope you'll do so very briefly, because it's very clear to me as chair right now that we have unanimous consent to support the motion. The debate that we're having right now, therefore, is on the motion. There is no more disagreement as to whether or not there'll be support for the motion. The disagreement is on whether or not the motion was necessary. To me, this is now turning into a little bit of a waste of our time, and I think that we have to return to the testimony of witnesses who have availed themselves to us today. Mr. Guglielmin, the floor is yours, but I would ask that you please just take the comments I've made into consideration. I'll return the floor to you.
Absolutely, and I'm glad that there's unanimous consent in supporting the condemnation of slave labor in China, because the number one responsibility and role of a member of the federal Canadian Parliament is to defend the interests of the Canadian people. Thank you.
Ms. Kirkland?
Yes. I think I would like to add an amendment to the motion. And the amendment would be this, and that the committee condemn the comments made by the member of Markham Unionville.
Okay. I'm going to just, I'm just going to discuss this for a moment with the clerk just to make sure, I understand the framing around this correctly. And then we'll come back to it. I'm going to just suspend.
Monsieur le Président,
oui,
juste un court rappel au règlement.
Chairman, there's 15 minutes left with the committees, and with what's going on, I think, unfortunately, we're not going to have enough time to ask questions of our witnesses. So perhaps it would be smarter to free them up before we suspend, and that perhaps we can send our questions by email, and they can answer by email. Thank you.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie, on a fait déjà dans des...
Thank you, Mr. Sainte-Marie. What we've done in other meetings is we've said, look, I'll listen to Ms. Kirkland's request. We're going to take a break. And then we'll continue with questions for the witnesses here, and we will guarantee that we will come back to the questions. This is how we can basically win in both areas.
If I can just speak to this. We've done this before. Everything's on the record here, too. We're public, so I'm not concerned about disagreement. I might suggest, in order for us to leverage the expertise that we have here, that we use 10, 15 minutes to re-engage with our witnesses with a commitment from everybody around the table that we will return to this. It's a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Irregular. But to me, it's a completely legitimate way for us to continue. We've done this before. So I'm going to look around the table to see how colleagues feel.
I think we can deal with this very quickly. We've got a motion. We've got a friendly amendment to the motion. Let's.
Okay. Without unanimous consent, Mr. Saint-Marie, I'm not going to make that decision because it is outside the scope of the rules. It's something I feel comfortable doing with unanimous consent, but with Mr. Falk's position, it's difficult for me to move forward outside of that scope. So we will continue within the frame of the standing orders. Madame Kirkland, go ahead. Was there anything else you wanted to add? Or perhaps for the record, you can just reread the sub-amendment that you're proposing.
Absolutely. And to add this.
Sorry, amendment, not sub-amendment.
The amendment,
Apologies.
excuse me.
Apologies.
And this is it exactly. And that the committee condemn the comments made by the member for Markham Unionville.
Okay. Mr. Bardisi.
Merci pour l'occasion de participer
Thank you for allowing me to speak to the debate on the amendment.
in this debate on the amendment. It's unfortunate that we won't get to hear the rest of the testimony from our witnesses today, it doesn't sound like. I think it'll be helpful for us to get a written submission from them with some more details about some of the aspects that we were looking to talk about, and perhaps we could, I don't know, Madam Clerk, if it's possible to send in some questions to the witnesses that they could then help respond to. I do want to speak to this amendment, which I and we will be opposing on this side. This isn't a very important study that was created and prompted with collaboration. It came from the other side, and we on this side, having already done, if you recall, in 2025, a 3-term study on in a very collaborative fashion, a three-session study. On the auto sector that was again prompted by the other side. We agreed to an additional study this time with a more of a focus on the electric vehicle sector. And so we as members have been working collaboratively on this, on now 2 studies. And I just want to recall that when we have been working collaboratively, we have actually been in a frame, a mold, a situation where we've been able to get responsiveness from the government, not always the policy objectives that were achieved by the government, achieved by the opposition. We had the minister in front of us. The minister's been asked to return already on autos once. The result of the earlier study, and all this is in the context of what I think is, I'm making these remarks about the earlier study and the work that we've done to date to express my disappointment about the direction that this amendment seems to be taking. So as a result of collaborative work, we were able to generate some very specific commitments from the minister on that first study. So for instance, the minister came and reported to us her intention to, the Minister of Industry, her intention to pursue legal options with respect to Stellantis after their decision around Brampton. And I think if I'm looking at my colleagues around the table here.
Just one second, I've got a point of order, Mr. Bardisi.
I don't believe that the comments being made are relevant to the amendment.
I've traditionally been pretty judicious, pretty gracious as well in how I've interpreted it. I'll make sure I'm listening a little bit more closely. Mr. Bardisi, I'm going to let you continue, but I mean, there is truth to the fact that it's got to be within the scope of the amendment. I'm not sure you're yet outside of that line, but something to be mindful of.
So collaborative work of this committee, which has not, to my experience in this committee, or frankly yet in the House of Commons, ever involved the naming of a member who had asked a question earlier in a session and condemning that had never been part of the work of this committee. We've done one kind of urgent study. We have looked at legislation, We have tabled 2 reports, Mr. Chair, and we've done that work largely collaboratively in relation to both the content and the process of this committee. And when this committee has had its, and when the leads, the caucus leads on this committee have had concerns and disagreements over the process issues, we have worked with you, Chair, with the clerk and with others, and with our own colleagues to make sure that we could achieve agreement. In some cases, there were issues that were identified within our caucuses, and we worked collaboratively to say, look, we're going to work with our members to see what collaborative space exists. And I think we've been very successful at doing that. We now have a new study here, which we are in the midst of doing, on a very important set of policy issues related to electric vehicles. The focus on this session in the questioning and some of the expert witness testimony, and definitely the questioning on the Conservative side has been on China, which is just one part of a larger set of issues related to electric vehicles and electric vehicle policy. I would point out that on March 31st, a result of this committee's work that was, I think, opposed by the other side, at least half of it being opposed by the other side, the other side encouraged the elimination of the electric vehicle availability standard, which was done by the government. And the government also brought forward new electric vehicle rebates, which the other side opposed. I will point out to the committee and to those Canadians watching that those rebates are going to be available starting next week, March 31st. Electric vehicle rebates of up to $5,000 on eligible vehicles. And we can have a policy debate about that. And in fact, we have had that. And today, this session would be a good opportunity to do that. Who is eligible, what kinds of vehicles could be eligible in the future. All those are very legitimate points of concern for this committee. We have, as the chair has pointed out, a record of the conversations of the last hour. And in fact, we have a record of what's being said now. In fact, this very
point of order.
This very motion has a record to it.
Mr. Bardizzi, you know I've got to address a point of order. Mr. Guglielmin on a point of order.
Yeah, the amendment was about comments made by Mr. Ma. Now we're listening to government talking points about EV rebates. So can we get to some relevance here?
Thank you, Mr. Guglielmin. I'll encourage Mr. Bardizzi to return to the basis. I did hear in his commentary some reference to prior discussions that have taken place at committee in relation to remarks made by members. I see some relevance in that. I also see a little bit of a skirting of that line. So taking the point Mr. Guglielmin has raised, Mr. Bardizzi, I'll ask you again to be mindful of relevance on the amendment.
Absolutely.
The floor is yours.
Absolutely. So as a parliamentarian here since May 2025, the bar to condemn an individual member of a parliamentary of a group within a parliamentary of parliamentarians, to me, and I think that our common law and our parliamentary.
Mr. Bardizzi, I'm just going to have to ask you to pause for a moment. Mr. Falk on a point of order.
Yeah, I've been listening to Mr. Bardizzi here, and he's using language that's inaccurate. Nobody condemned anyone. We've pointed out what people have done and expressed our disappointment.
Okay.
So I'd like him to retract that word.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Falk. I doubt there'll be a retraction, and I think we're splitting hairs. I think we're splitting hairs a little bit here, but Mr. Bardizzi, point's been raised in terms of keeping on with the relevance, and I'm just keeping an eye on the clock. We do have additional resources that have been granted, and I'm about a minute away, witnesses, from letting you go. I've hoped that we would get to a resolution, but I'm getting the feeling we might not, so we'll just wait, okay? Mr. Bardizzi, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, in parliamentary debate in the House of Commons, condemnation of what is said by the other side is a frequent, almost routine occurrence. It is done in the spirit of debate, and I have not yet participated in my time as a member of the House of Commons where that practice is common, let alone at committee where it is not common. I've yet to witness a successfully passed motion or even a credible motion in the House of Commons that has condemned the comments of another member. In the cut and thrust of parliamentary debate, of course, we do that. That is the House of Commons, and that is the place where those kinds of more partisan and more sharpened discussions around policy tend to take place. In this committee, we have a record, the Hansard will produce the record, and people are free to interpret that record. It is not appropriate for this committee to reflect on its own conduct of the last hour and a half when we have witnesses in front of us, when there are radically different views of the interpretation of what happened in a very short exchange, that we can leave it to other parliamentarians, we can leave it to members of the public to pronounce on. For a committee to pronounce on its own, the comments of one member, which are clearly evident in the parliamentary record, and to lift that up in some regard, and to have a motion, and to ask the members on this side, and frankly, and mon collègue à côté du bloc, pour nous appuyons une motion comme ça.
To support a motion like this,
Bar is extraordinarily high. We have no evidence that has been brought forward by anyone in this committee to date that suggests that the work of my colleague over here, Mr. Ma, and what he said has in any way violated standards such that the extraordinarily high bar that it should take, that any committee, that any deliberative body should take to condemn one of its own applies here. We are nowhere near that bar. I would invite my colleagues across to show precedent, past evidence, specific examples where a committee has condemned one of its own members after comments that were made that were in the Hansard, that are available in Hansard, where frankly, and again, we as parliamentarians also enjoy the benefit of privilege, parliamentary privilege. I would invite them to show one example where a committee in this parliament has done this.
Okay, sorry, Mr. Falk.
Has passed a motion condemning one of its own members.
Okay, so colleagues, we're losing a little bit of we're losing a little bit of our procedural. I'm trying to remember what the word I'm going to use. So, Mr. Viss, Mr. Falk, Mr. Bardisi, I got a lot of crosstalk. Colleagues, the witnesses were told they would be here today until 1 o'clock. It's now 1 o'clock. Witnesses, thank you for availing yourselves. We very much look forward to any testimony that you want to provide to the committee through the clerk. We would certainly be keen to know what might have been said here today. Members, of course, are always encouraged to reach out with sets of questions as well if they'd like. Everything related to official committee business, as a reminder, colleagues should go through the clerk and her office. Having said that, Mr. Taylor, Madame Vlanich, thank you very much for being here with us today. I'm going to let you go on with your day, but appreciate the fact that you've stood through this with us for the last little bit. Mr. Bardisi, the floor is yours.
Well, I just want to conclude by saying I can't help but think, although my usual interlocutor on these issues for the Conservative Caucus, Ms. Dancho, is not here today. I cannot help but think that some of this, behind this amendment, is some concern around my colleague's presence on this side of the desk and not that side.
Okay, Monsieur Saint-Marie, la parole à vous.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Évidemment.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very sorry for the witnesses who sat here for an hour and were unable to really give they gave the presentation. We were unable to ask questions. I know they'll be able to respond to questions by email, but it's very unfortunate. As noted, I'm in favor of the motion, like all members of the committee, in order to gain a bit of time so we could ask questions of the witnesses. I did not ask any questions, but given that they're gone now I'm going to speak to the amendment. From my point of view, it is not the role of a committee to condemn what was said by one of its members. I think the strength of a democracy is the freedom of speech and to express opinions that are not unanimously supported, and that everyone has the right to speak their mind, and then we can debate it afterwards. Mr. Bardizzi was saying that for a year now, he's been in the House and at committee here, and he spoke to his experience. Well, I've been here for just over 10 years, and I would say in a partisan manner, we're here to represent our constituents and our parties. And for the most part, what I hear in the House and in committees, I would be against it. But I understand that can change. However, I don't think the role of a committee is to condemn what's been said by one of its members. And I think democracy requires freedom of speech and of opinions that are not unanimously supported, and that's why I would turn down this amendment. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Samari.
Bit of a status check here for us. I do have Ms. Kirkland. I believe you'd raised your hand with a desire to speak to this amendment. So what we now have is, prior to the amendment, we had unanimous consent on adoption of the motion put forward by Mr. Guglielmin. We then had an amendment put forward to that motion by Madame Kirkland, which is what we've been debating over the course of the past several minutes. I suspect, based on what I'm hearing, that members from the Liberal side will oppose the amendment, although I'll look for some clarity from them. Monsieur Saint-Marie from the Bloc has indicated that he will oppose the amendment. If a vote were to occur, we know what the result is. However, as you know, colleagues, I can't call a vote until debate has collapsed on the matter. So at this point, I would encourage us to think about where we want to go from here. We know what the end result is going to be unless there is some line of questioning that persuades members around the table to change their mind. It's, of course, the prerogative of members to try to do that. But after I provide the floor to Madame Kirkland, I will encourage us to think about allowing this to go to a vote, given that we know what the outcome of that vote is going to be. Madame Kirkland, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate the fact that you gave me the floor. I just since it was in question why the amendment came forward, I just wanted to clarify that before we go to a vote. So the amendment I decided to add was added due to the opposition we seem to have from my colleague Mr. Ma across the way to the initial motion made by Mr. Guglielmin. And I believe that that made me feel like the member across the way was defending again the fact that he had defended China's record, it seemed to be, in the way that he was questioning our witness. So for clarity, yeah, that is why I added the amendment. We could have moved a lot quicker had we not had that added. So thank you, sir.
Okay. Seeing no further, okay, Mr. Ma?
Well, thank you, Ms. Kirtland, for your comment, and seems like you're projecting a personal perspective and interpretation, and same as Mr. Falk and Borelli. So, we are here to represent Canadians, and you are injecting your personal views, and you're not allowing me to project my comments. And so if you look back at the records, it was a question and the witness answered. There was no projected comment one way or another. So if you want to spin this any way you want, I guess you will do it anyway. But letting the record sit straight, that's what the questions and line of questions was. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ma. Seeing no further speakers, I'm going to call the amendment to a vote. Madam Clerk, on this one, I think I'll get you to call the vote.
Sure. On the amendment of Ms. Kirkland, Mr. Bardizzi.
Against.
Mr. Baines.
No.
Mr. Ma.
No.
Ms. O'Rourke.
Against.
Ms. Borelli. Ms. Kirkland?
4.
Mr. Falk?
In favor.
Mr. Guglielmin?
In favor.
Mr. Saint Marie?
Contre. Contre.
Against.
Yeas pour 4, nays contre 5.
Okay, so colleagues, the amendment has been defeated. We're now back to the main motion. We have already indicated unanimous consent for that motion. Pardon me, Mr. Guglielmin?
On the main motion.
The floor is yours, Mr. Guglielmin.
Thank you. I would like to add an amendment that says, and the committee report to the House.
Just give me a moment to chat with the clerk. Okay, colleagues, I'm going to suspend because there's going to have to be some discussions amongst the parties here in order to create a little bit of efficiency about where we want to go. We do have the extra resources, so I'm in no rush at this point. I'm going to suspend, give everybody an opportunity to think about the amendment that's been proposed by Mr. Guglielmin, and we'll come back to it. Suspended. Mr. Bardisi, I see you've got your hand up. Just give me one moment, please. Okay, so parties have had plenty of time to discuss. I think that they have a sense of where they'd like to go with this. I do have a procedural issue that I have to deal with. So, Mr. Guglielmin, you made an amendment to your own motion, which you cannot do. That means that I have to rule it out of order, which brings us back to the main motion. I'm going to go, yes, Madam Kirkland?
Are you?
You can, but I'm going in the order that's been set, so I'm going to go to Mr. Bardisi, followed by yourself. And then, of course, at that point in time, you can propose an amendment if you so choose. Mr. Bardisi, the floor is yours. Colleagues, just a reminder, the amendment was ruled out of order for the reasons I just specified. We're now back to debate on the main motion. Mr. Bardisi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to move a very simple, very brief amendment to the motion to strike the words in China and replace it with globally, en français, au niveau mondial.
Okay. That one was pretty clear, colleagues. So I don't know if we need translation on that. An amendment has now been moved. We now begin debate on yeah, I'm not relieving you of the floor just yet. I'm just clarifying for the committee where we're at procedurally. Everybody's clear, I believe. Mr. Bardisi, the floor is yours. Is that a desire to speak? Okay, so I have just as a speaking order currently Bardisi, Kirkland, O'Rourke, Guglielmin, Saint Marie. Mr. Bardisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And obviously, where we started today with the work of this committee and where we've ended up has been a bit of a surprising journey for us. But here we are. And so I think, you know, on our side, we considered the opportunities in front of us, but we understand that the Conservatives offering a number of amendments to their own motion have been changing the goalposts with respect to what was put on the table a while ago. I also do want to point out that I think this is an important, larger policy question. I know there are written recent news articles about, and in fact was referred to earlier, the work of Mr. McKay and other former parliamentarians on the human rights and forced labor policy issues generally. And so I think it's important, if indeed that we want to look at this issue, then we're not really looking at this issue. We're focusing on just a statement of principle. And the statement of principle that I have just outlined is seems pretty incontrovertible. It doesn't seem like it would be something that would be hard to disagree with. I'll also note that there are more competent committees that have been looking at these issues or have been engaged in these issues, and it might be worthwhile considering if we are interested in the substance of these issues, that we work with the competent and relevant committees that have the expertise in these areas to do that. Obviously, as a committee that's focused on industry and technology, we can have a piece of this issue, but I know there are other committees that have both more a background and more of a connection to these issues, whereas I think we are in the midst of a very important study here that we want to continue to do.
Okay. Madame Kirkland, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair.
Pardon me?
I find this amendment surprising, but not surprising. It sort of reveals to me an awful lot of where the Liberals are going with this. They seem to want to take the spotlight off of the subject matter at hand, which were the unsafe and forced work conditions in China. And so why they would want to do that, we will leave up to the Canadian public, and perhaps my colleagues may wish to comment on it. I find it very revealing, and perhaps what Mr. Guglielmin said earlier is more true than I thought when we started this meeting today, which is that perhaps these aren't just the feelings of my colleague Mr. Ma, but perhaps it is a soft launch for what Mark Carney is trying to do in terms of softening his stance on China. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madame Kirkland. Madame O'Rourke, the floor is yours. I'll just remind colleagues of the speaking order. I have Madame O'Rourke, followed by Mr. Guglielmin, followed by Monsieur Saint-Marie, followed by Mr. Bardisi. And a reminder, we are on the amendment, not on the main motion. Madame O'Rourke, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the subject matter at hand today was electric vehicles, and a subset of that was a concern around the importation or allowing the importation of 49,000 electric vehicles from China. That was the subject matter that was at hand. That's what the witnesses were here to talk about, and in fact, through this whole surprise motion, we didn't get to hear from two witnesses, some of whom I think were invited here by the members opposite. So the subject matter at hand was initially Ontario, Canada's auto sector that has 500,000 auto workers. It was about the potential impact of EVs, positive, negative, perhaps a reflection on the government's auto strategy that was warmly received on February the 5th from all of the industry stakeholders. The subject matter at hand was all about Canadian manufacturing, Canadian jobs, the strength of our sector, and potential impact. So through a fair question to one of the witnesses, we seem to now have devolved into an examination of human rights in China, which is a fair question. But the same question can be asked to a broad range of products and can be asked to a broad range of countries. And so do we not import clothes from all over the world, from Bangladesh? Are there not potential human rights abuses in a number of places? And so if we're going to have a legitimate conversation about human rights in China or elsewhere, then let's have that conversation. I really think that if the question was legitimate, then as the opposition has done on many occasions in this committee, they would have put an order on notice. We could have invited witnesses. We could hear actually from real experts on the real implications of this. If this is a serious conversation, there are other committees that are better positioned, like international trade, like global affairs, to really look into the matter around how human rights issues intersect with Canadian global policy and domestic policy. And so what I struggle with, we had unanimous consent around this table for the original motion, and that wasn't sufficient. Then the opposition wanted to have, or the Conservative members of the committee wanted to have an ad hominem attack on one of the members of this committee, which is also not at the heart of our auto manufacturing, of jobs in Windsor and Cambridge and Guelph and Alliston and all these places that we're talking about. It was not about having a conversation about our EV supply chain or about the investments the government is making. So we've diverted into this brand new realm that if we wanted to address it legitimately, there is a way to do that more broadly, in a more robust way, in a committee that specializes in that can bring in a minister, their staff, call in experts for a study where there would be real benefits to Canadians, as we have done on productivity, as we have done on the defense industrial strategy, and quite cordially, in fact. And, you know, we talked about some of the ethics around the defense industrial strategy. We are able to have these difficult conversations here.
Madame O'Rourke, just a moment. I have to address a point of order from Mr. Falk. Mr. Falk?
I allowed her quite a bit of latitude, but she's so far off base that she needs to talk to the issue. And the issue is they want to change the word China, which we know this whole debate is revolving around China and whether China is the human rights abuser and whether China is the country that's committing forced labor situations for the Uyghur people and forced organ harvesting for the Falun Gong, persecution of Christians. This is about China. This is about no other country, and she needs to focus on that.
Point of order.
Okay, so just on that point, that particular point of order, take your point, Mr. Falk. Because the amendment now speaks to changing it, it means that it expands the scope of what can be discussed, but discussion should be related to the scope, whether that's globally or pertaining to one country. But because we are on debate on the amendment and not the main motion and not what the motion, the previous amendment that was ruled out of order, it can expand, of course, beyond China specifically. Mr. Guillermin, I hope it's a real point of order here.
So
because
it's a real point of order.
If it's the same, I just want to say, if it's a point of order related to relevance, I just dealt with that in what Mr. Falk has raised. But go ahead.
It's just on the changing of the motion. It diverts the original intent of the motion so substantially that entire amendment should be ruled out of order.
Okay, so are you challenging the ruling of the chair on that?
Before I challenge the ruling of the chair, does the chair not agree?
No, I don't agree, Mr. Guglielmin. You, of course, are allowed to challenge my decision, but no, I don't agree with your characterization. I think if I ruled this amendment out of scope, then I think I ought to be held accountable for allowing the previous one to have been called within scope. So I'm trying to be fair to both. Is that the end of the point of order, or would you like to continue with a challenge to the chair?
I'd like to continue with the challenge.
Okay, so we have a challenge to the chair. So, colleagues, we've been through this before. Mr. Guglielmin is challenging the chair's ruling in terms of the relevancy vis-a-vis scope of the amendment proposed by Mr. Bardizzi to the main motion, which struck the word China and replaced it with globally, in essence. Are there any questions, or can I go to the clerk to call the vote? Madam Clerk, I will ask you, because I know this one can sometimes be confusing on the terminology, to just clarify for members what word they need to use in order to properly express their perspective. Thank you.
So the question is, shall the chair's ruling be sustained?
Just explain what that means. Just to be clear.
So if you agree with the chair's ruling, then you vote yes. And if you disagree with the chair's ruling, then you vote against.
Okay, thank you. Call the vote, please, Madam Chair. Madam Clerk.
Oh, promotion.
Freudian slip.
Mr. Bardizzi. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Mr. Baines.
Oui.
Oui.
Yes.
Mr. Ma. Ms. O'Rourke.
Oui.
Ms. Borelli. Against. Ms. Kirkland.
Against.
Mr. Falk.
No.
Mr. Guglielmin.
No.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie.
Oui.
Nays, contre 4, yeas, pour 5.
Okay, so the challenge the ruling is sustained. We continue where we were on debate on the amendment as it had been presented. Madame O'Rourke, the floor continues to be yours.
Thank you, Chair Carr. So just to, in French, say revenons à nos moutons. The topic of the meeting is federal government's electric vehicle policies. The topic is about the federal government's auto plan that was launched in February, that is a comprehensive plan. And so there is a sub-piece to the conversation today that is about allowing the importation of Chinese vehicles back to the level that we had in 2023 when there was a different American administration, when the policies were different, when those 49,000 odd vehicles being imported here were Teslas and Polestars, and that there was no concern on the part of the industry, there was no concern on the part of the opposition, and in fact the 49,000 vehicles, should they all be imported, is less than the Kias sold in Canada right now. So, and we don't seem to have a big concern about the current EVs that are sold from a range of other manufacturers from other countries. So I'm just bringing us back to the whole point of this conversation, which is a legitimate and important conversation for the auto sector, Canadian manufacturing, Canadian workers. It is about the future of the Canadian auto sector, which includes electrification. We know that 20% of vehicles currently sold globally are electric vehicles. We know that even in the United States, despite adversarial policies, 20% of luxury brands are all EVs. We know there will be a technology transfer to that. And so there are issues that were raised, and the witness who was speaking earlier also said we have mechanisms to address those concerns. So if we're going to be looking at any human rights concerns that we have with respect to the EV supply chain, vehicles, then it makes a lot of sense to broaden that out, to not look at only one country, because we have to remind ourselves that there are a number of inputs in everything from our iPhones to the Google glasses to your, smart watch to the things in your home that have critical minerals from all over the world, some of them with dubious human rights practices. And so if we're going to have a real conversation about that, let's not sneak it in at the last minute in a way that is completely disrespectful to our witnesses, that detracts from the matter at hand. You are, folks on this committee are experts at putting a motion together that is well thought out, that is discussed ahead of time, that people can prepare for. Everyone came to this meeting today prepared for the witnesses out of respect to them and their time. Everyone came to have the conversation that the Conservative Party asked to have here and that we supported. So why would we not have a proper, broad, robust discussion about that? Why would that includes more than China? Why would we not have that conversation take place in a committee where there's more expertise around that, such as global affairs or international trade? My colleague, Mr. Sainte-Marie, has a colleague in the Bloc who has a private member's bill before the House regarding human rights violations and in a number of different industries. Like, if we're going to have a real conversation that is of value and that is to the level that Canadians expect in a parliamentary committee and in our legislature, then that should be done properly. It should not be in a narrow focus. It should not be after we've voted down a personal attack on a member of this committee who asked a question in good faith and in a way that has been seen many, many times with tactics used by Conservative members of this committee. And so we were ready to vote on this motion 40 minutes ago. I'm not sure what the time is. We were ready to support this motion. But this is about politics. This is about casting aspersions on our Prime Minister now. So we've heard a couple times around how, the Prime Minister could be involved in this. So if we're going to have a conversation that is legitimate, then we need to do that. And we need to not narrow it down to one trading partner. We need to be looking broadly at what this means. And, we could broaden it out as well. If we could broaden it out to look at what the environmental issues are, right? If we really want to have a robust conversation in service to this place with a study that can be used by other people to advance their own reflections, then we should do that properly. So, Monsieur le Président, écoutez.
So, Chair, I think it's important that we have a debate and a study that's appropriate for this committee and reflects the Parliament of Canada. This is what our constituents expect of us. They, too, believe that it's important to respect human rights and that we all agree here. In fact, we all agreed 45 minutes ago. But rather than saying, yes, we're going to act, yes, we're all united against human rights abuses, suddenly we're taking all sorts of other means to attack our Prime Minister and avoid the matter of EVs and their manufacturing sector. We know that EVs are the future. People don't want to talk about how we can save 500,000 jobs in Canada. People don't want to talk about a legitimate issue and talk about the supply chain for critical minerals, for manufacturing, for assembly lines. There was a witness who was going to speak to us about molds. I think I'm very interested in molds because, you know, car parts are very important in Guelph. I had questions for that witness regarding investments planned by the federal government to support those companies. But rather than hearing those witnesses speak, we're targeting a member of the committee who's here because his constituents elected him to be at this committee, rather than focusing on the research that we had prepared for this committee. So what I would suggest, I mean, we're proud of the work that we're doing here because we're preparing for it. The Library of Parliament has done research and provides us with questions so that our work be useful and that we can use it to have well-articulated questions. It's good for Canadians. So if we want to have questions focused on human rights globally, then we can't focus only on China. We can say, sure, China in this case, but also what are the other inputs that go into cars, in semiconductors, in chips, and our phones, and all other technologies. But this is a much broader study that would focus on all countries of the world that provide us with products that use critical minerals. So if you want to have that conversation, we should do it properly. We should refer it to the correct parliamentary committee, which would be Foreign Affairs or International Trade. And what the members of the opposition should do is to speak to their colleagues who sit on those committees and ask them to submit a motion, like they've often done here, so that there be a study on productivity. I don't know if it was us or the Conservatives for the strategic defense industry, but also for AI. There are procedures well established here that allow us to do appropriate and useful work, which is good for Canadians, good for industry, and for the workers in those industries. I imagine that a lot of people would be very interested in the contributions of our witnesses here today. And unfortunately, we won't be able to draw any useful recommendations from these witnesses because rather than easily approving a motion that everyone agreed on, this was not the ultimate goal of the Conservative members on the committee today, obviously. The members of the committee, I mean, I think even if we settle the question, are we going to focus on China or are we going to look at things more broadly or globally? Well, then there'd be another motion. They're hungry for this today. And when there's no substantive motion, well, then suddenly it becomes a personal attack. That's really unacceptable. Parliamentarians are here to represent our constituents. We have our own personal and professional baggage. We're here to ask questions respectfully at committee and ask questions of our witnesses. So we want to talk about human rights. We're willing to do that, but it has to be a broader, useful, informed discussion. Canadians don't want us to just talk off the cuff here. They don't. They want us to sit down, to have a 2-hour-long conversation on a specific topic with witnesses who came from somewhere else. Mr. Taylor, he came from Toronto. We didn't ask him a single question, unfortunately. And Canadians expect us to do good work. So this is what I suggest, and I support my colleague in his request to have a real, useful conversation, but I would suggest to my colleagues, because they're saying, sure, we could have that conversation, but I think it should be constructive. It should be at the appropriate committee, based on research, so that we're not sitting here desperately looking for data on our computer. And this is what happens every day in parliamentary committees. This is what Canadians expect of us. That if we want to have a good conversation where data is useful, then a motion is tabled at committee, in the relevant committee, and everyone knows how to do this. It would be for foreign affairs or international trade, or, as our colleague from the Bloc said, it's through a private member's bill. We have mechanisms in place to do things properly based on research done in advance. And that's what Canadians expect of us.
Well, Mr. Gouliamine, I think the interpreters might be happy because there was a transition from French to English there, so it gives them an opportunity to prepare. Yes, go ahead.
Is the member filibustering to avoid this committee condemning China
Mr. Gouliamine,
and their human rights abuses?
Two things there. The first is that's not a point of order. The second is I couldn't answer the question. And the third is even if one chose to exercise their right within the purview of standing orders to speak to a motion, as many members from all parties have done from time to time, they're entitled to do so. I'm going to return the floor to Madame O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not at all. I think that all of us are concerned about human rights. All of us are concerned about potentially unfair labor competition with Canadian workers, regardless of where it comes from. And Canadians were interested in this particular study because unfair, illegitimate American tariffs are attacking our auto industry. And in response to that, the Government of Canada, the Prime Minister, through consultation with all of the industry groups, on February the 5th, presented a robust auto strategy that provides supports from government, that provides supports for workers, and that provides a comprehensive EV strategy. It was so well received, Mr. Chair, that the opposition wanted to bring another study to try and find ways to challenge it. So that's fair. That's their right. They can do that. We had witnesses today who were prepared to testify on various aspects of the EV strategy, including the Chinese piece. So all we're saying here is that if we want to have a real conversation about human rights, then let's do it in a robust, comprehensive way, not as a sub-amendment in a different committee. When we meet as a committee, we have Library of Parliament researchers who do a background brief so that we are all working on a similar set of facts, right? Facts. We're not in the middle of an EV study talking about harvesting organs, right? we start with a common set of facts about the topic at hand. We invite witnesses who are here to inform us. We have an opportunity to ask questions. There is a study that is drafted. We have a chance to review that, and that is appropriate and useful for Canadians. Dropping an amendment in the middle of a committee meeting on something else that could have been dealt with, actually, 50 minutes ago, because we all agreed. So clearly the goal is not ultimately to have this conversation. It's about a diversion. And so what we can be doing is, if we want to have a conversation about human rights, there are places in Parliament to have those fully informed with research, unbiased research, with an opportunity to bring witnesses, an opportunity to question them, an opportunity to do our own additional research, so that we really have an honest, fair conversation about this. And the members know, some of them have said they've been at this for 10 years. They know full well they can have a well thought out motion. They can put that motion on notice. There's an opportunity to discuss it, debate it. Everybody agrees. We're on our third or fourth study now, so they know how that works. They have colleagues at the Foreign Affairs Committee. They have colleagues in international trade. Wouldn't they rather, in that place, do it properly and have the opportunity to invite a minister, to invite experts, and if there was conversation that could potentially damage international relationships, to do it in camera? Wouldn't that be more reflective of a responsible parliament? And so I think that what we want to be doing here, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, apologies, we're getting close to question period here.
I'll take the promotion. Thank you.
Okay.
Madam
It is.
and the driver and the cottage.
You know, so my colleague's amendment to say, if we care about human rights, then we are looking at human rights more broadly, because look, there's rubber in tires. There's all kinds of critical minerals and all kinds of things that we carry every day with us. And we can have a conversation about, are there security threats to vehicles? And then we should have the same conversation around iPhones or wearables or Google Glasses. And if those are legitimate threats, then how we address those. But what you have to do to make good public policy is to start on the basis of fact, solid committee work, research, and conversation. And we were ready to have that conversation like 50 minutes ago. And rather than pursue that line in good faith, the members of the opposition wanted to attack a colleague here. And we know, Mr. Chair, that they're already sharing clips on social media. So it's not about a legitimate study for human rights. We'd be ready to have that conversation. Our colleagues in the appropriate committees would be ready to have that conversation. And it's unfortunate that we are sort of involved in some political theater here that is not appropriate. So there's lots of crosstalk here, Mr. Chair. It's clear that there's not a ton of respect for this committee process. Otherwise, we would have heard from our witnesses, frankly. So, je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. Listen, I mean, it's ongoing in social media. This whole political theater here. This wasn't a legitimate proposal. It was really to create clicks and clips for a member who is not in the committee, but he's there sending out clips. He's dealing with social media. I was here prepared and ready to intervene and speak to the witnesses. And that's what I expect of all members of the committee, that you should be here in good faith to produce something that's good for Canadians. I was here today for the automotive sector, for the workers, and as you can see, we're not the ones who are posting things on social media. We're here to do serious work, legitimate work.
Order, Mr. Falk.
She's so far out in the bay, I don't know if she'll be able to swim back. But, what she's talking about is people's social media activity. She should actually zero in and get back to the actual discussion on the amendment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Falk.
On the amendment.
Sorry, one second. Mr. Falk, as is often the case in drawn-out discourse around amendments and motions, there's an ebb and flow. I think you were probably right to intervene at that particular moment, but I think it was a moment in the context of a broader set of points. So we'll allow Madame O'Rourke to use it as an opportunity to refocus and speak to the amendment as is her prerogative.
Mr. Chair, the amendment is about whether we talk strictly about China or whether...
Point of order.
Mr. Guglielmino on a point of order.
Mr. Chair, I can't believe the Liberals have been filibustered a committee to avoid condemning China for their use of forced labor. Is that what's going on there at this committee right now?
I have listened to many points of order today from you, and I appreciate your desire to raise them, but I think you know that is not a legitimate point of order. Madame O'Rourke, I return the floor to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we were willing to do that an hour ago now. And all I'm suggesting is that if we have that conversation and what my colleague's amendment is, that wasn't good enough when we were ready to have that conversation.
Madame O'Rourke, I'm going to interrupt you. It's 2 o'clock. Resources have been exhausted. Meeting adjourned.